with that, I'm excited to introduce this morning's keynote. So this morning we have Dr. Punya Mishra. He's an Associate Dean of Scholarship and Innovation at Arizona State University, where he leads multiple initiatives to provide a future-forward, equity-driven, collaborative approach to educational research. Dr. Mishra is internationally recognized for his work in educational technology, creativity, and the application of design to educational innovation. He's received over $9.5 million in grants, published over 200 articles, and edited 5 books. He's the co-developer of the TPAC framework, which is described as being the most significant advancement in the area of technology integration in the past 25 years. With over 50,000 citations, Dr. Mishra is ranked among the top 2% of scientists worldwide and the top 100 scholars with the biggest influence on educational practice and policy. As a TED Ed educator, he co-hosts the award-winning Silver Lining for Learning webinar and the Value Laden and Learning Futures podcasts. Dr. Mishra challenges audiences to think differently about the role of technology in education and to embrace new approaches to teaching and learning. We're very excited this morning to learn from Dr. Mishra as he helps us explore the intersection of technology and education and how we can use this knowledge to create effective learning experiences for our students. Please join me in welcoming Punya Mishra.
Thank you, Alex. I always hated when people give these introductions because you set the bar too high. I always prefer it like, oh, we just got this guy and he's going to talk about something. And then, then you can do better or not, meet it. But thank you. That's a very kind introduction. And I'm going to try and share my screen and make sure that that works properly. Okay. Is it okay if I share it this way rather than, because that way I can see my screen a little better. I just have a one screen setup. Can everybody see this? Is that okay?
Looks great.
All right, let me try something. This is too much. All right, well, we'll go with this for now. If it's an issue, just let me know, Alex, at any point and we can change things around. So, thank you so much again for the introduction, and thank you for Heart of Innovation for inviting me to speak at your summer summit. I have actually a pretty strong connection with Iowa, particularly with Iowa State University, though there is a sad part to it, which is that when I applied for grad school, I applied to Iowa State and they didn't give me, an assistantship or admission or something like that. My wife did end up going there, but some of my closest professional colleagues are at Iowa State University. In fact, it was a great honor for me last December to be in Ames to give the first Ann Thompson inaugural lecture on educational technology. Ann is an absolutely close friend and colleague and a mentor for me. And it was just awesome to be there. And I think that's where Marissa and some others heard me speak and decided to invite me for this session. So I'm very excited about that. Just to give some context, a little bit about myself. As Alex said, I am Associate Dean of Scholarship and Innovation at the Teachers College here at Arizona State, here for 7 years. Before that, for 18 years at Michigan State. So, then before that at Urbana-Champaign. And so I've been in the Midwest for a long time. And that's my website. Almost everything that I do is publicly available on my website. That's my email address. I do reply to every email. I promise you that. So anything, just feel free to reach out. And those are my other social handles or whatever. In terms of my background, my undergraduate degree is actually in engineering. And then I'll talk a little bit about how I ended up coming into education through the circuitous road of going into a design school, wanting to make educational film. Ended up getting my PhD, and most of my work, as Alex said, has been in EdTech, creativity, teacher education. And I sort of call myself today an education systems designer rather than a researcher. Because I think education is one of those things where you're always seeking to improve what you already have, your existing practices, the work you do. And also, I have a parent, I have 2 kids who are now not in the school system, but, have been through public schools. And I served as a school board member when I was in Michigan. So one of my big regrets is that, I got this job at ASU and I couldn't be on the same ballot as Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. That would have been a picture worth keeping. Just, I don't know if I would have won or not, but that would have been something special. But sadly, that was not to be. I ended up here at ASU. Like I said, I'm originally from India. Growing up, I loved learning. I just loved reading anything and whatever, art, science, math, technology, cognition, what have you. So this is just a sample of the books. And I want to highlight the one which is the third from the left in the top row, because I'll come back to that one. And that's a book called Gödel, Escher, and Bach by a professor who is now in Indiana, Douglas Hofstadter, which was very influential in my thinking. And I'll cycle back to the reason why I sort of highlight that book. And, in India, if you're good at science and math, you have to either become a doctor or an engineer. I didn't want to be a doctor, so I ended up in engineering school. And those were what I call the four sort of literally the worst years of my life. I just hated the way education was done. And I call this the Fourier transformation. I went in this super excited, energetic young man wanting to really do, be a scientist, and like 4 years just beat it down. And, and I at the end of those 4 years, I really considered myself that I had failed, as in, that I had failed, let down my parents, the usual stuff that comes with all that. And I decided that, okay, since I cannot be a scientist, I can't do this work because I'm clearly not good enough. I still love science. I love film. I love literature. So I'm going to make a career in making educational films. So I ended up getting my master's degree in visual communications. And it's there for the first time. That's me on the left. That's when I had hair back in the day. So, and that's the first time. This is back, and I'm talking about 1988, when I first saw the Mac. I had done some programming and coding before on IBM PCs, but suddenly my interest in the visual, my interest in art, interest in science and technology all sort of came together. And I felt like this is where I felt something was fundamental, was shifting there, even though this is pre-internet and all of that. And that was going to be my career. And I actually went back to my institute, and this is one of my former students who was at that time the head of department, and he still had that old Mac sitting in his office. So we managed to get a picture with that. And at that, I realized that there was sort of a lot more that I needed to learn. So I ended up coming to Urbana-Champaign, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, to get my doctorate. And what I was sort of bringing to that was this background in design and an interest in education and a passion for ideas. Like what happens at the intersection of that? And when I was there, I found this book. Somebody actually gifted me this book called Discovering, because they knew I was interested in science and the history of science and creativity. And it was this book by Robert Root Bernstein. And I had, at that point, was sort of thinking about doing my PhD dissertation about how students learn biology, particularly the theory of evolution, because I think that that's a really powerful idea, but that students have a difficult time understanding it. But there was a throwaway section in the book. It was literally like a small paragraph, which said there are 400 different representations of the periodic table of elements. And I was just blown away. I was like, what the heck? I mean, I knew the history of this thing. I knew Mendeleev and his cards and all of that. And I had seen this representation in textbooks. I had seen them in walls, in every lab, you have the periodic table of there. And it's like, what are these 400 different? So I just go down this rabbit hole and I'm checking out books. This is pre-internet, or early internet. So I'm just checking out books from the library, and these are the kinds of different representations of the periodic table that are available. And to say that, it blew my mind. There are three-dimensional ones, spiral ones, and none of them are wrong. Just like a map of the Earth, the Mercator projection of the Earth is not wrong. It's right for certain things and not right for other things, right? So every representation is a misrepresentation, but it is what purpose you use it for. And the reason why this is like two key insights struck me is, like, first, how much fun chemists are having with this, and we don't let our kids have fun with it. So chemists are actually like little kids with Lego blocks. They're like, oh, I can add the hydrogen on top of this and I get a spiral. What does that mean? But in our schools, we don't give students a chance to do that. For them, we put this up on the wall, we put it in a textbook, and we say, this is the truth with a capital T, and now memorize it, right? While chemists are playing. And that was one sort of insight there. And the second one was, like, why a certain representation has become the dominant representation, and why is it structured the way it is. So if you look in the periodic table, those of you who are science teachers would know that there's a bunch of elements which are put at the bottom, sort of separate from the table. And actually the table should look like this, but we make it look like this. And the reason for it is because chemists wanted to fit all of that into a textbook page. So which means the technology of print was constraining. And there is research to those students have a really hard time trying to recognize the fact that you have to go cross and bounce back out into those two rows and then back again. It's actually quite complicated for students, right? But it was the technology of print that was constraining it. And so then this is like early internet that I'm talking about. So I'm talking about 96, 97. I said, oh, we now have a technology that allows us to zoom in and zoom out, that allows us to click on elements and find out more about them, about their history, about their properties, allows us to traverse different representations and see what their strengths and weaknesses are. And so that became my PhD dissertation, which was this piece of software called FLIPS, which is flexible learning in the periodic system of elements. And this was like years of like a year and a half of work, coding, blah, 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 all of that. And then doing the studies with students to see whether they were learning chemistry better or not. Sadly, none of those plugins and things work. And so this software doesn't work anymore. But what I learned from that is that this intersection of a technology, a certain content, and how we want to teach it can work together. So that was the germ of an idea that was sort of developing. I ended up at Michigan State University as an assistant professor in 98. And in 99 or 2000, I met this guy, a very cool looking guy, born in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. I looks cool even without his glasses, Matt Kaler. If you look us up, you'll find that Mishra, Kaler, Mishra is, we have worked very closely together. He is one of my best friends. I officiated his wedding. I mean, we are, but also like intellectually, we have worked really well together over the years. And one of the things that we focused on, and those of you who know the TPACK framework know where the story is going, and I'll be quick with that because that's been around for a while before I move on to something else. So what is it that teachers need to know to intelligently integrate technology in their teaching? And so the difference between, one of the things that had already been talked about was there is a difference between knowing a discipline. I mean, we've all had professors and teachers who know their discipline really well, who are fabulously good at like mathematics or science or art or literature. However, they may not have that ability to teach a discipline. That there is a special kind of knowledge that educators have, which is how to take these complex ideas, these really difficult processes and so on, and get them in a way they understand students, they understand the misconceptions that students have, and they manage to transform what they know, that expertise of content, into pedagogical form. That's a special kind of knowledge. And the person who first talked about it is Lee Schulman, who, as it turns out, was at Michigan State back in the late 70s, 80s, when he came up with this idea of pedagogical content knowledge as being a special kind of knowledge that all educators have, right? And so when we Matt and I started talking about it, we realized that technology was shifting so quickly and so fast, digital tools in particular, this is I'm talking about, the web was just kicking in, the internet, you had Wikipedia, you had blogs and websites and different kinds of resources online, which were starting to kick in, that this is going to transform education for sure. I mean, we saw that during the COVID pandemic, right? I mean, the difference between, let's say, the 1918 flu epidemic and now was that we could still, it was hard. And I'm sure Alex and all the tech team still sweat thinking about those first few months, and all of us as educators figuring out how we can move everything online. But we could do it. At least there was an option, right? And so our work sort of talked about this intersection, but we also approached this with sort of some humility, because I mean, here, we have this thing now, right? This creature. And frankly, the talk that I was going to give this morning was completely different. So when Marissa contacted me back in, I don't know, February or March about this talk, I had a completely different talk in mind. We live in a different world today than back in Feb of 2023. And so here is a quote, which is the introduction of AI into education may prove to be an event as epochal as the application of the principle of wheel to transportation or steam power to the industrial age. And I'm like, oh, look at that quote. So AI is going to be bigger than the wheel or the steam engine, except that I lied. That quote was written in a book in 1933, and it was about the moving picture. Film was supposed to transform education and classrooms and everything. I have lots of quotes like this. They're fun to read. So this is what was supposed to happen, right? And we know it didn't. So I think when we think about technology's implications, I approach that with a great deal of humility, recognizing that yes, technology has the power to transform, but it exists within broader systems and structures and cultures that sort of push it in different ways and so on. So with that in mind, we recognize that most technologies are not designed for education. Like ChatGPT, classic example, are not designed for education. But what we do as educators, we redefine technologies. We take technologies out there and we use them in different ways. Like here's one of my favorite examples is email. Like for instance, email for me is a way of keeping notes in a meeting. Because it's open, it's right there. It's a way of archiving things. I send emails to myself because I need to print it out. So email was meant as a communication between people, and I use it for all kinds, and all of us do, for all kinds of different things, right? Some examples, this is a Chinese restaurant where they use clothespins to keep track of orders. Now, those were not designed to do that. This is from India. In fact, this January, I was in India with my family, and this is called a Maruta, which is basically you take pieces of trucks and cars from a junkyard and you put it together, and it basically runs on duct tape and magic, and a piece falls off, and then you add one more, and it works. It goes at 10 miles per hour. It's okay. But the important thing for us as educators is that only repurposing makes technology and educational technology. So if you look at YouTube or WhatsApp or Office, none of these were truly designed for us as educators, right? In fact, even textbooks, we take textbooks and we say, read this section, don't read this part. Here are some additional resources from the web that I found. So we take tools even which were designed for us and make them amenable to our context, our needs, our students' needs. So I think that's a really powerful thing for us to think about as we think about technology, that repurposing is this creative act that we as educators do, and that technology changes what we teach. If you look at any field of human activity, it is different today because of technology, right? It takes music, how we create music, share music, buy music, listen to music, changed. Journalism changed. Astronomy, I had a friend at Michigan State. He was an astronomer. I don't know if he had looked into a telescope in 10 years. He would get gobs of data, and then he would do data analysis on them and figure out like how black holes collide or whatever cool stuff he was doing, right? So an astronomer in the classic sense of the word really is now a computer science / mathematician with an interest in astronomy, right? And so every field has changed. And so if we want our students to be prepared for the future, we need to be looking at the way that content is in the world today. And technology changes how we teach, right? I mean, this is to be one of those things which I used to really enjoy saying, which is like, for facts, go to Google, for wisdom, come to me, right? That's my job as a parent. That's my job as an educator. The facts are out there, how we make sense of them. Though some of these things, I'll talk a little bit more about how some of these things are shifting in the world around us. So this is sort of the canonical sort of TPACK framework. Many of you must have known about it, so I won't beat that to death. But the idea that technology, pedagogy, and content have to work together. It's at that intersection that we as educators live. That's where we have always lived, right? Whether you're talking about a chalkboard or you're talking about the web or you're talking about AI, it's always, that's our role as educators, is to look at some subject matter, some content, some ideas that we need to transfer, get our students to grasp and work on some tools and technologies that we have in hand to do so, and some techniques that we have for getting that to happen. That's the pedagogy, right? Again, this is all self-serving, stuff. People cited it. It's influential, blah, blah, blah. So forget all that. Now let's come to this. This is where my talk shifts, right? My talk was going to go on about design and so on. And now it's like my world has changed, right? And so the question that sort of ask myself is like, does TPACK matter in this world of Gen AI? What role does TPACK have in that space? Does it have any space at all? And that's why, if you remember, I mentioned this book, Godel, Escher, and Bach. So I actually got into being interested in science and art and literature and perception and psychology through this book, Godel, Escher, and Bach, back when I was in high school. And this is Douglas R. Hofstadter, he got the Pulitzer Prize for this book for nonfiction. Big, heavy influence on me, very playful mind, and I sort of picked up a lot from him. And he has been working in the area of AI for the past, 30, 40 years. And this is what he said recently. And then the systems got better and better at translation between languages, and then at producing intelligible responses to difficult questions in natural language, and even writing poetry. And then he said, it's a very traumatic experience when some of your most core beliefs about the world start collapsing. And this is from an interview that he did, I think a month ago, maybe less. And he was speaking of this new generative AI tools that have come about. And to give some context, the way AI has traditionally worked, that Douglas Hofstadter, the tradition he comes from, is we have to build systems which top down so that we can map our understanding of the world into the systems, and then it will be able to. So for instance, Douglas Hofstadter does a lot of work in analogy. Like, how do humans make analogies? Can I build a system which can make analogies about the real world? There's a different tradition of AI which has suddenly come to the forefront, which has been sort of puttering around in the background, which is we don't care about what models it has. We just throw a lot of data at it and let the computer find patterns in layers and layers. So it's doing more and more abstraction. And suddenly you find these tools which they didn't train it to translate languages. It just does it. They didn't train it to write computer code. It just does it. And that's what's shaken Hofstadter to the core, because he has spent his entire career thinking of human cognition and brain and all of those things in a certain way. And now that has been unleashed on the world by these companies. Then we can talk a little bit about what those motivations are. And so I want to spend a little bit of time, there's been a lot of hype and doom and whatever. Is this the end of education as we know it? There were stories in the Atlantic about the college yesterday is dead, writing, blah, blah, blah. And then you have the other side, which is like, oh, this is going to make education awesome. This is the solution to all our problems, blah, 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 right? There was a report that came out from the Office of Educational Technology. Well, of course, I had to take the report, drop it into AI qualitative analysis tool and say, can you give me a limerick, which is an abstract of the report? So it gave me the limerick, which is AI in education can aid, but bias and fairness must be weighed. Educators and students must co-design to make assessments more fine and ensure learning growth is not delayed, which I thought was not a bad summary of the report. At the same time, this is a recent report from the Wharton Family Foundation that teachers are increasingly using these tools. I'm on this Facebook group for ChatGPT for teachers or something like that. And it's a phenomenal group. I just lurk there for the most part, just watching what people are talking about. And discussions range from people saying like, I have no idea what this is, how should I do this, to people creating resources and sharing them. There are all these debates about the ethics of using these technologies. What does it mean? The issues of equity as to who has access to them, who doesn't. A phenomenal sort of group, just for me to watch and learn from educators. What I want to sort of focus on, though, a little bit of my talk here, this is a paper I just recently wrote that it's under review right now. Because I think a lot of the discussion around what Gen AI is, I think it's been mistaken. So I want to focus a little bit about what this technology is. And I'll give examples. If you go to my website, it's punyamishra.com, you'll see that I have been playing with this for the past, since it came out back in November. And I have lots of examples of things that we can do. So most of my examples are going to come from my own sort of experiments with it, right? I think it's only when we understand what this technology is that we can start to leverage it for our education, right? So first thing I think it's really important to recognize is that Gen AI is not a search engine. I had a guy who was a big shot in Deloitte, computer science degree, what have you, kept telling me that, oh, Gen AI, when you type into ChatGPT, it goes on the web, finds the answers somewhere and gives it to you. Like, no, it doesn't. Right? It is making the answer up based on its learning, so on, right? But it is that's why it's generated, right? So what it is, I want us to think about two aspects. So whenever you are thinking about Gen AI, think about these two things. First, it is generative, as it's given in the name. And there's a lovely piece by Ted Chiang called ChatGPT 3 is a blurry JPEG of the web. So basically what he's saying is you've taken all these texts, and now we are making this interpolations between them. Right? And that's how it is generating new text and new ideas, images, what have you, right? The second, this is another blog post that I wrote, and this was awesome because now because I use the word BS in a technical sense. There's a philosopher, he just passed away actually a week ago, who wrote this great piece called On Bullshit, which is about, and I can now use it in an academic piece, so I've never had a chance to do that. And he sort of talked about this idea that there are truths and there are lies, and there are other things which are just they don't care about truth or lies, right? And GPT-3 has no understanding of the real world. So it is supremely confident about anything that it gives you. I think that's a really important thing to understand, that it is generative and it can make things up. The second thing, and I think not many people have paid attention to this one, which is that this is a social technology. So what I mean by that is that every other technology, my interaction, let's say if I'm working with Microsoft Word or something, or any other tool, or driving my car, there is a predictability to it. I don't use natural language. I don't speak or type into it, right? While this is a social media in the genuine sense of the word. And I think the implications of this, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, the implications of this down the road are going to be very significant, because we humans, we are social beings. So these are some examples. If you see in the picture on the bottom right of my screen, all these different faces. I take pictures of faces that I find in the world, right? And you can find faces everywhere. And that's because our brains are wired for socialization. And so one of the things that happens when we interact with these technologies, people describe these as having personalities. So people will say, and I can tell you, Bard Bing Chat is a funkier dude than ChatGPT. And Bard is boring. I do not feel like interacting with Bard. Bard is boring, at least the version that we have now. ChatGPT, not bad. The 4.0, not bad. But if I want to have fun, go to my website and look up my bio that Bing Chat wrote about me. And I said, write me a self-deprecatory funny bio. And oh my God, it is hilarious. And it cuts very close to the bone and a couple of sentences there. It's fabulous, but it's got a personality. So we will ascribe beliefs, desires, personalities to these things. I think that's really important to understand. It is also a tool for creativity. So again, bunch of blog posts from my web, from my experiments with this. I had a conversation with Jiddu Krishnamurti, he's an Indian philosopher of education, and John Dewey. I had them have a conversation with each other. They both value learning through experience, but Jiddu Krishnamurti talks about it much more in a spiritual sense. Dewey talks about it in terms of citizenship. So what are the commonalities? What are the differences? And they had a little chat with each other. Well, kind of fun to read these two guys talk, right? Who don't exist anymore. So a variety of different experiments that I've been doing to actually see how I can become a more creative educator. The other thing is that these tools give us superpowers. I mean, I don't know how to code in Python. I had no idea. I have never, ever done it. I have written working computer programs just by interacting with GPT. So, when you get a Zoom transcript, it has all those time codes and all that gunk in it. And if you want to analyze it, it takes you a long time to clean it up. I have a running app on this machine where I can drag a Zoom transcript and it cleans it up. I have no idea how it does it. GPT wrote the entire code. It gave me a superpower. So a couple of posts that I would really, if you're interested in this, to go and just poke around and learn, come and take a look at a few of these. I had some data, I had an Excel spreadsheet of some survey data from our faculty at our college. In 30 minutes, I created a downloadable Word document, an analysis of the data, of the quantitative data. It gave me pie charts. Of the qualitative data, it gave me a synopsis. And here's the part. I had it create those graphs, those pie charts in ASU's colors. I said, I want you to make these pie charts in ASU colors. They said, so what are those colors? I said, here it is. I said, okay, done. That's crazy. And I'm talking with it. I'm going back and forth with it. Every conversation is unique. It's a very, very interesting way of sort of working. And of course, we know this, that it makes stuff up. So we know learning styles are a myth, but I had Bing Chat create a whole table of learning styles for me, and then create personas and provide ways that a kinesthetic learners would learn like algebra. It just made it up, right? It didn't care whether it was right or wrong. So I think that's an important thing to know. That one on the right-hand side, the leftmost top photograph is my dog. And I could use Firefly and other Photoshop beta tools to make him rollerblade in a city landscape. And the scariest one actually for me is the panel at the bottom. There's a tiny little picture on the side. That's him in our backyard. And the next one is him in a fictional backyard. That backyard doesn't exist anywhere. It's absolutely photorealistic. So I think the implications of that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that down the road. But I think the implications of the fact that we can create content which will be very realistic through this medium, which is an interactive social medium, has significant implications down the road. Of course, these have inbuilt biases. So for instance, in the one that I did about learning styles, all the characters, profiles that it created and names it gave them were like Caucasian names. There was Alex, and there was Brian, and there was Tiffany. There was no Punya, there was no Youngkin, there was no Deshard, no, right? So biases. But here's the other one. You can go and listen to these clips. So Adobe took my accent and cleaned it up and removed my Indian accent without ever asking me whether it should do it or not, by the way. It was just like, yep, we're going to clean up the audio, and boom, the result of it, my accent was changed. This digital cloning myself, this one, I have a video on my website, which is entirely generated through AI. So the words are written by AI. My voice is trained on 11 labs, and the video is made from just a still of me, right? And my accent has been changed as well. My voice has been changed. It's just, I don't even know, right? I mean, like what the implications of these things are, right? At one level, it'll be like, hey, I can give this keynote without ever showing up because I can just type this script up and some creature will show up and then speak to you and you guys won't know, right? But at the other level, what does this mean in a world which is rife with misinformation and false facts and fake news and driven by political distrust towards institutions? So there's a lot of implications. So to sum up, I mean, this is my latest blog post that I wrote, which is that ChatGPT or other forms of generative AI, we should see them as being smart, drunk interns. And that's exactly how I treat this guy. I'm very respectful to this fellow. We have a good time together, but I'm distrustful of what it comes up with. But has it made me more efficient in certain things? For sure. Like everything I write now, I proofread. I use ChatGPT to proofread it. If I'm thinking of writing a paper, so I was thinking of some analogies, and I was like, hey, I'm thinking of these analogies. Can you think of like, what am I missing here? Right? I find it a great critical friend. So if I'm writing something else, okay, what are some mistakes in this? Like, how am I wrong? Because we all have confirmation bias, right? Once we believe something, then that's the truth, and we will just see the world through that. This is a great tool to say, no, how could I be wrong about this? I mean, suppose I think I understand Newton's laws, for instance, and I say, okay, tell me some ways that you can find out if I truly understand Newton's laws. So it is, but we have to recognize that it is also occasionally drunk. And always keep that in mind. But you have at your beck and call today an intern who knows a lot about different things. And that can be used by you as an educator. And so coming back to TPAC, and then somebody's obviously going like, what the heck, why is everything about TPAC? But here is, for instance, an example that I grabbed from the Facebook group I was talking about, and see how they worked on developing a lesson plan. It's not, so those of you who have played with GPT and have made that transition through seeing it as an other, an expert, as somebody you can interact with, it changes the way you work with it. I've had colleagues of mine come and sit with me because they brought data and we said, okay, can we do some analysis together using GPT-4 and whatever. And the first thing they say that, oh, you are actually talking to it. So whenever I start a project, I don't start a project by saying, give me like blah, blah, blah. I say, I'm thinking of this. Let's ask me some questions about how this should be done. And it'll ask me a bunch of questions. And then I'll say, but I don't know about this. What do you think about that? But I'm not interested. And so we just go back. It's an interaction. And so if you see that part about iteration and being suspicious of what it comes up with. So focusing on conceptual stuff is actually much better than focusing on factual stuff. So that's kind of an inversion of sort of the internet as we knew it, right? Where we could go for facts and for wisdom, you could come to me as a parent, as an educator. I think these Gen AI tools shift that paradigm a little bit. I have sort of alluded to this, and these are some of the more long-term concerns I have about this technology, because technologies have unexpected effects. So there is the thing that is possible with the technology, and there is this thing which Stephen Johnson in his book calls the adjacent possible. And I want us to, as educators, as people in this field, to think about that. So maybe the greatest educational technology is the printing press, right? If you think about printing press, Gutenberg's press comes along, the Renaissance, Reformation, Age of Enlightenment, modern science. In fact, the idea of universal education, that everybody can read, books are still the foundation of education that we know, right, in classrooms today. Now, what's interesting is the printing press, before that, we didn't have to peer at tiny little print. And if you had like hypermetropia or farsightedness, it didn't matter, but suddenly it did. And so something which was just for monks, this glasses, within 100 years of Gutenberg, there were spectacle makers across Europe, and became the first piece of technology. I'm wearing one right now. Apart from clothes that we just wear, it's part of who we are. This is me, right? Without this, I'm nothing. I won't know what's going on. However, that same playing with glass and making lenses led to things like microscopes, telescopes, and next thing you know, we have a completely different vision of who we are in this planet, in this world, right? And so that was not something that Gutenberg was thinking about when he was designing like the printing press, right? He was thinking about, oh, this is a way of getting the Bible out to people. But that would be this transformational over a few hundred years is crazy. Like this is another one, the telephone. That's what allows us to build skyscrapers. Because otherwise we'd be running up and down giving messages. So in some ways, it liberated us from gravity. At the same time, it created a new class of people who are now disabled because they couldn't go up and down. So we had to come up with a new technology called an elevator. And so as we think, I know each of you is thinking about your classroom, your students, your context. But I think that as educators, and this is something that I have learned over the past few years, and I want to share that with you guys, is back in 2006, 7, 8, feedback framework was picking up, social media appeared on the scene. And honestly, if I go back, and you can go back and look at my blogs, I have written about how I can use Twitter in my graduate level seminar. How can I used to have private Facebook groups for my teachers in my master's program and so on, right? And there was this, I had this sense of like, oh, wow, this is bringing people together, connecting us. What I didn't realize is that there are broader socioeconomic reasons where these technologies are going to focus on engagement over concern for user well-being. That Facebook and Twitter can get weaponized and take sort of already existing schisms in a society and make it worse. And then we have a report now from the Surgeon General about the impact on mental health of these social media. And I look back on that 2007-8 me and I say, how was I not thinking more long-term? Because you know what? Now it has become an educational problem. These students are in your classrooms. They are in my university. They are in my classrooms, right? And so when we think as educators about this, we need to be thinking, I've realized, a little bit more long-term. But I don't want 10 years from now to look back on what I have talked about, what I have written about generative AI. I find it a very exciting technology, but I also want to recognize that its impact is going to be more complicated than I think. And so what happens when the price of creating something drops to zero? Right? What does it mean for people who are trying to manipulate us, market things to us, and so on? I think that's incredibly important in a world that is already racked by tribalism, fake news, and systemic challenges. So as educators, these kids who are in your classroom are going to be entering into a world where there is going to be a lot more of this because it's become easier to do it with AI. We have to recognize that. And we have to think about ways that we help our students develop the skills and talents and critical thinking abilities to question some of these things. Not to give them the right answer, because that's not the point, but to give them the tools that they can seek that for themselves. I think that's incredibly important. And this is Yuval Harari. So he has this great quote. He said, AI has hacked the operating system of human civilization, because he says language is what makes us, right? I mean, he says human rights aren't inscribed in our DNA. They are cultural artifacts created by telling stories. Same thing with money. And what we are doing is we are creating this technology which is now proficient at our unique superpower, which is language. So I think a discussion of foundational values in educational settings becomes really important. So I was at a conference the other day and somebody said, so what impact can we as educators and policymakers have on this? I said zero, because there is too much money at stake. But you know what will happen? It will be our job, your job, to clean the mess that these companies will make. I'm just being blunt about it. And so all I want is us to be prepared for that. I don't want us to be surprised by what came down. Let's use these tools intelligently and smartly, for sure, but also be aware that there are long-term consequences that we need to be preparing ourselves and our students for. Right? So I'm not coming at it as a Luddite, but I'm also not coming at it with this rose-tinted glasses. I think that much the last 10 years or 15 years have taught me being in this field, and I just want to be sure about that. But I also want us to be positive about it. I think, like, Steve Jobs said that everything in the world around us was made up by people no smarter than us. So which means we can take it and we can remake it and redo it and repurpose it for our needs. And this is something I've always talked about, this idea that us as educators, teachers, we are designers, we build stuff. We take things out there that people made for some other reason and we use it for educational purposes. And because only repurposing makes a technology an educational technology. So ChatGPT or Claude or Bard or Bing Chat, whatever, they were not designed or created with you and your 5th grade math classroom or your high school AP class or your music class in mind. But this is where you come in, your expertise comes in, where you bring those pieces together and say, how can I make it powerful and useful for my students? So all of these, we have always done it. And this is the creative act by educators. And if anything, I just feel that these new tools now empower us further to be able to do that. Even keeping in mind that there are broader social consequences that can emerge from it, which we don't know what they'll be, but be prepared for that. So this is a picture of my setup here. I am at a hotel because I'm leading a leadership retreat for ASU. And so I got up this morning and I realized I hate presenting sitting down, but I didn't have a standing desk. So I got 2 tables and put my suitcase, and that's my laptop. That's how I'm presenting to you. And that's what educators have always done during the pandemic and so on. It's like, we make it happen. It doesn't matter how. And the cool thing is that I love working with educators and presenting and talking to educators because I can show you. I have no shame in showing you that, listen, I just made this work somehow. I tried all kinds of combinations of desks and stuff last night. Just like, I was like, oh, I got to feel. But I can tell you because you understand. You understand what it is to take limited resources, to take the constraints and build something special for the kids in your care. And for that, I am always grateful. And I think it's important that, that we understand the system and the culture and that we work to design and change that for the better and hopefully leave it better than we found it, which I'm sure is not going to be the situation with that ball of yarn if left for a few more minutes. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I hope things that I talked about made sense, connected, and that is my contact information. Like I said, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm open for any questions, comments, and thoughts you may have. I'm going to switch off screen sharing if that's okay. Alex, is that fine?
Absolutely. Yep.
All right.
So we've got a couple of minutes if anybody has any questions for Dr. Mishra.
Oh, thank you, Marissa. My pleasure. I'm glad we got it to work out. Oh, the other thing that happened is that Phoenix got rain for the first time in, I think, 3 months. And there was a power outage in the hotel as well. And I got so worried. I was like, oh my God, this thing isn't happening. But luckily it seems to have cleared up.
All right. Well, thank you again. There was so much good information, a lot really to think about, I think, this morning as we get things kicked off with our conference this morning. I think this was a great way to kick things off and help us to begin thinking a little more deeply about some things, both the past and the future, and some of our considerations as we think about how we can use technology, both the good and the bad. And I'll just not a question, but just a quick comment here. I really appreciated that towards the end, as you talked about teachers being designers. I think that's an important thing for all of us to remember, that really technology, as Dr. Mishra mentioned, technologies are not generally created for us. So we're repurposing those in the ways we can to be creative and use them for the benefit of us and for our students. So I thought that was great. Thank you very much for that. So many good things to think about here. And as we
Alex, quick question.
Yes.
Is the recording going to be like publicly available on your website? Because I can blog it and link to it if people want to. How's that?
Yes.
Or is it going to be behind a paywall or something like that?
No, it will be publicly available. It will be on our YouTube playlist, so we can share that link with you. So that would be
That'd be
fantastic.
great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep.
Because I do get people visiting my website, and it'd be good to have them see this. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think so much great information. Yeah, I think that would be
This is
great.
actually my first AI talk, you know.
Well, yeah, it's such a new technology that I think we're
Yeah.
all kind of learning as we go and figuring out how we can best use this.
No, my daughter got pinned it right. She said, like, you are schizophrenic. Like, what do you mean? It's like you are super excited. You're like a little kid in a candy store or in a toy store. And at the other end, you are scared. And I was like, you are absolutely right. Like, there's a part of me which thinks that this empowers us in ways, gives us what I call superpowers that I never thought I could code in Python. I've written plugins in WordPress. I mean, I don't even know what that means, right? I just blindly follow instructions, right? So fine. At the same time, having lived through the social media kind of a thing and realizing that it is not an unmitigated good, that the underlying economic models which are based on advertising and eyeballs can have significantly detrimental effects. I mean, we think it's bad here. You have to go to places like India and Bangladesh and Myanmar to see that this actually leads to mayhem and death. Like, these tools have led to that. And so I just don't want to be that rose-tinted glasses about, at the same time, I am quite encouraged as an educator about what I could do with my students with this. And so it's having that dual focus, which I think is going to be, for all of us, the biggest challenge. But that's what I want that was, I think, the main message I wanted everybody to take, is like, play with this. You will make good things happen for your students. I know it, but also think about the long term, that how are we preparing them for that long term? So thank you.
Absolutely. I love that message. And I think, and I know this is something you mentioned as well, but it definitely brings that emphasis back to our focus on things like the universe, what we here in Iowa call the universal constructs, which are essentially the 4 C's of education. So yes, I think those things become even more important as we have more technologies available. Absolutely. Well,
right.
thank you. Oh, go ahead.
No. I've got to run to this session now, the other session that I'm leading now. So
okay, perfect.
Thank you for this.
Thank you very much. We appreciate everything. So much good learning. Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Bye, Alex.
And